The detention cell hummed with a low frequency that meant someone important approached. Royal Guard Lieutenant Kale Theroux pressed his palm against the transparent barrier, watching the Zarathian diplomatic corridor beyond. 3 days into what should have been humanity's greatest achievement, first contact with the Zarathian Empire, and he was locked in here for a comment he didn't even remember making clearly. His reflection stared back, dark circles under amber eyes, jaw tight with frustration. The conference had been chaos. 17 human delegates, twice as many Zarathian officials, translation algorithms struggling with context, everyone exhausted from the negotiations. He'd been standing near the refreshment station helping himself to something that approximated coffee when Ambassador Chen had mentioned the Queen's upcoming arrival. Someone had asked what she looked like. Kale had seen the preliminary footage, the ceremonial broadcasts. He'd spoken without thinking, fatigue loosening his tongue. Stunning, actually. Not what I expected from an insectoid species, but there's something about the symmetry, the way the light catches the chitinous patterns. He hadn't meant for anyone important to hear. Certainly hadn't expected the entire Zarathian security detail to freeze, their compound eyes swiveling toward him in perfect unison. The temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees in the silence that followed. No one had explained the charges. No one had said when he'd face judgment. The Zarthenians communicated through their embassy liaisons in careful, measured statements that revealed nothing. His own command had been sympathetic but clear. This was beyond their jurisdiction. The Empire had requested his detention. Earth's government had agreed, desperate not to jeopardize the alliance before it even formed. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. Kale straightened automatically, years of training overriding his anxiety. The barrier shimmered and dissolved. 6 Zarathian guards entered, their ceremonial armor catching the light in prismatic cascades. They stood 7 feet tall, bipedal but distinctly alien, their movements fluid and unnervingly graceful. The lead guard's mandibles clicked in what the translation matrix rendered as formal speech. Lieutenant Theroux, you will come. No explanation, no reassurance. Kale followed because he had no other choice. They moved through corridors he'd never seen, deep into the Zarathian section of the station. The architecture shifted, becoming more organic. Walls that seemed to breathe with subtle bioluminescence. Other Zarathians watched as they passed, their silence more condemning than any accusation. They stopped before a massive door engraved with symbols that predated human civilization. It opened soundlessly. The chamber beyond took his breath away. It was vast, circular, with a domed ceiling that displayed what he assumed was the Zarathian homeworld's night sky. Constellations he'd never seen wheeled overhead in slow rotation. The floor was polished to mirror brightness, reflecting everything twice over. At the chamber's center stood a raised platform, and on that platform sat a throne carved from a single massive crystal that pulsed with internal light. She sat perfectly still, and Kale's heart stopped. Queen Lysandra. Even having seen the broadcasts, nothing had prepared him for her physical presence. She was larger than her guards, easily 8 feet tall, her exoskeleton a deep midnight blue that shifted to purple and green in the chamber's strange light. Forearms rested in positions of formal patience. Her crown, if it was a crown and not part of her biology, rose in elegant, sweeping curves that seemed to defy physics. Her face was angular, alien, beautiful in ways he had no reference for. The compound eyes reflected his image back at him 1,000 times over. He was supposed to bow. Every protocol briefing had emphasized this. Instead, he froze, caught in the terrible understanding of his situation. She'd been there, at the conference. He'd been muttering his observation, thinking himself safely anonymous in the crowd, and she'd been standing somewhere in the room, listening. Understanding every word through translation matrices far more sophisticated than humanity's crude algorithms. One of her secondary arms moved in a gesture his translator couldn't parse. The guards retreated, leaving him alone with her, the door sealed. Silence stretched between them like a physical thing. When she finally spoke, her voice bypassed the translator entirely, emerging directly into his mind with a clarity that made his skull ache. You find me beautiful. It wasn't a question. Her primary arms shifted, fingers 3 to each hand, longer than his forearm, drumming against the throne's armrest in a rhythm that might have been amusement or anger. This is the crime you are accused of, Lieutenant Kale Theroux of Earth, speaking truth about the eternal sovereign without permission, without protocol, without understanding the weight your words carry. Kale's mouth went dry. He'd expected a tribunal. Expected charges read by subordinates, formal accusations, legal process. Not her, alone, speaking to him as if they were the only two beings in existence. "Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect." Her hand rose, cutting him off. "Silence? You will speak when given permission." The mental voice carried absolute authority, but underneath it, something else, something he couldn't identify. She stood, and he understood viscerally why the Zarathians built their thrones on platforms. She towered over him, each movement deliberate, and approached with steps that made no sound on the polished floor. She circled him slowly, and he felt the weight of her regard like pressure against his skin. "For 300 cycles I have ruled the Zarathian Empire. For 300 cycles, no one has dared speak of my appearance except in the most formal, religious contexts. We are a species that values protocol above all else. Hierarchy. Order. Distance between ruler and ruled." She completed her circle, standing now directly before him, close enough that he could see the microscopic patterns etched into her exoskeleton, fractals that repeated infinitely. And then a human, barely more than a child by our standards, looks at ceremonial footage and mutters to his colleague that "I am stunning." The word echoed in his mind, laced with something between wonder and fury. His training screamed at him to apologize, to grovel, to do whatever necessary to escape this situation. But something in her bearing stopped him. Something in the way she held herself, rigid with a tension that had nothing to do with anger. "Permission to speak, Your Majesty?" A pause that lasted heartbeats. Granted. Kale chose his words carefully, aware that his life might depend on them. "I spoke carelessly, but I spoke honestly in December. In my culture, acknowledging beauty is not an insult. It's recognition of something worthy of admiration." Her secondary arms crossed over her thorax in a gesture his translator labeled as contemplative. "And do you still find me beautiful, Lieutenant, now that I stand before you in judgment?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications he didn't fully understand. He met her gaze, all thousand facets of it, and answered with the same honesty that had condemned him. "Yes." For a long moment she didn't move. Then something extraordinary happened. The rigid formality in her posture softened almost imperceptibly. Her mandibles shifted in what might have been a smile. "Then perhaps," she said, her mental voice quieter now, almost intimate, "we have much to discuss about the differences between our species, Lieutenant Theroux, and why what you see as a simple compliment threatens to upend 3 centuries of tradition." The chamber's light shifted, constellations wheeling overhead, and Kale realized with creeping certainty that his detention was just beginning, but whether he was prisoner or something else entirely, he no longer knew. Queen Lysandra gestured toward a section of the chamber where seating materialized from the floor itself, organic and flowing. "You will explain to me how humans can be so reckless with their words and yet so precise with their technology. You will tell me why your species sent someone like you to these negotiations." She settled onto her own seat with liquid grace, forearms arranging themselves in positions of attention. "And I will decide whether your crime deserves punishment or whether it deserves something far more complicated." Outside the chamber, the diplomatic conference continued. Humanity and the Zarathian Empire negotiating treaties and trade agreements, unaware that the real negotiation was happening here, between a queen who had been called beautiful and the man who had dared to say it aloud. Kale sat, hands trembling slightly, and began to speak. He told her about Earth, about humanity's chaotic approach to diplomacy, about his own journey from military academy to this impossible moment. She listened with an intensity that suggested she was hearing not just his words, but everything beneath them, his fears, his hopes, his absolute terror at the situation he'd stumbled into. Hours passed. The constellations overhead completed full rotations. Neither of them moved from their positions. Somewhere in the flow of conversation, the dynamic shifted. Questions became exchanges. Exchanges became something approaching understanding. She asked about human concepts of beauty, and he tried to explain aesthetics that had evolved on a world nothing like hers. He asked about Zarathian protocol, and she revealed the crushing weight of being seen only as a symbol, never as a person. "For 300 cycles," she said again, but this time her mental voice carried exhaustion, "I have been eternal sovereign, sacred, untouchable, perfect in the eyes of my people. No one questions. No one comments. No one sees me." She leaned forward slightly, and in that small movement, Kale saw something that transcended species, loneliness, the kind that came from being elevated so high that connection became impossible. And then a human who knows nothing of our ways looks at a recording and sees beauty. Not divinity, not symbol, beauty. Her mandibles clicked in that gesture that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. Do you understand why I brought you here, Lieutenant? Cale thought about it, about the careful isolation of their meeting, the absence of witnesses, the personal nature of her questions. You wanted to know if I was mocking you? No. The word resounded through his mind with crystalline clarity. I wanted to know if you were real. She stood again, moving to the chamber's edge, where the wall displayed flowing patterns of light. Every dignitary who comes before me speaks in carefully prepared statements. Every subject addresses me through layers of formality. Every interaction is scripted, measured, designed to maintain the distance my position requires. She touched the wall, and the pattern shifted in response to her presence. But you spoke without knowing I could hear, without preparing your words, without considering consequences. You spoke truth reflexively, carelessly, honestly. She turned back to him, and for the first time since entering the chamber he saw her not as the alien queen, but as a person trapped in circumstances she hadn't chosen. Tell me, Lieutenant, if I were human, if all the protocol and position were stripped away, would you still find me beautiful? It was a trap. Had to be. Every instinct trained into him screamed that this was some kind of test with no correct answer. But something in her stance, in the vulnerability beneath the question, demanded honesty. I don't know how to answer that, he said carefully. Because you aren't human. Because the protocol and position are part of who you are. I can't separate them in mind, and I'm not sure I should try. Her posture shifted again, mandibles moving in a pattern his translator couldn't parse. A diplomatic answer. An honest one. Silence fell between them again, but it was different now. Contemplative rather than threatening. Finally, she spoke, her mental voice carrying a decision he could feel forming. I am going to make a choice that will horrify my advisors and potentially create an interspecies incident. I am going to grant you freedom of the court. He blinked, trying to process the statement. I don't understand. You will be assigned as cultural liaison to the Zarathian delegation. You will attend all meetings, all ceremonies, all formal functions. You will observe our protocols and explain them to your people. And in return you will teach me about human perspectives on beauty, truth, and the reckless honesty that your species seems to value above survival. Her secondary arms crossed again. And perhaps in time you will help me understand how to be seen as both sovereign and person. How to maintain authority while acknowledging that I am more than the role I inhabit. Cale's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just about his initial comment anymore. This was about bridging not just species, but fundamental differences in how power and personhood intersected. Your Majesty, I'm just a lieutenant. I'm not qualified. You are qualified precisely because you are unqualified, she interrupted. You have no agenda beyond honesty. No diplomatic training to make you cautious. You see what you see and speak what you think. In a court that has forgotten how to be genuine, you are exactly what I need. She moved closer again, and this time when she looked down at him, he saw calculation in those compound eyes. But understand this clearly, Lieutenant Theroux. You will be watched. Every word analyzed, every action judged. The Zarathian Empire does not change easily, and what I am proposing will be seen by many as dangerous precedent. Her voice dropped to something that felt almost like intimacy. And you will never again comment on my appearance without understanding that your words carry weight beyond what you intend. That they can disrupt protocols, challenge traditions, and make an eternal sovereign question herself. The weight of it settled on him like physical pressure. He was being offered a role that could either bridge two civilizations or destroy the fragile peace before it truly began. I accept, he said, because what else could he say? She was offering him purpose, danger, and something that looked remarkably like trust. Queen Lysandra's mandibles spread in what he was learning to recognize as satisfaction. Then we begin tomorrow. Tonight you will be escorted to proper quarters befitting your new position. Rest. Prepare yourself for scrutiny beyond anything you've experienced. She gestured, and the massive doors opened. The guards waited beyond, but their posture had changed subtly. No longer jailers, but escorts. Before he left, Cale turned back. Your Majesty, may I ask one question? A pause. You met— Why me, really? Out of all the humans involved in this conference, why choose me for this role? She was silent for a long moment, and when she finally answered, her mental voice carried something that might have been vulnerability or might have been hope. Because when you said I was beautiful, you weren't trying to flatter me or manipulate me or gain advantage. You were simply stating what you believe to be true, and I have not heard truth spoken so plainly in longer than you have been alive." She turned away, returning to her throne, and her next words were dismissal and promise together. "Now go, Lieutenant. Tomorrow we will show the Empire what happens when protocol meets honesty. Tomorrow we will teach both our species that beauty and truth are forces more powerful than any treaty." Kale left the chamber, his mind spinning with everything that had just happened. Behind him, Queen Lysandra sat alone on her crystal throne beneath alien stars, and allowed herself to hope that perhaps, finally, she had found someone who could see her truly. The door sealed with a sound like thunder, and in separate spaces, Queen and Guard both contemplated the impossible future they had just agreed to create. Outside, the diplomatic conference continued, unaware that the real alliance had already been forged in honesty, vulnerability, and the simple act of speaking truth to power without fear. The story of humanity and the Zarathian Empire had truly begun. Two halves,